Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Sean. I'm from Pro Manchester. I'm the Events and Marketing Manager. We're just going to hang back just for a couple of minutes to let people get themselves registered and signed in on the Zoom. You that I haven't met previously, my name's Sean Gibb and I'm the new Events and Marketing Manager here at Pro Manchester. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, which is Emotional Intelligence, Managing Our Emotions at Work by Impact Consulting Psychologist Limited. Today's speaker is Shelley Rubenstein, Chartered Psychologist, Founder and CEO of Impact Consulting. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Shelley.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Sean. That's great to meet you. I'm sure you're going to do a great job and we'll be seeing lots of you. So as Sean says, I'm Shelley Rubenstein and I'm going to be presenting the webinar, Managing Our Emotions at Work. A few little housekeeping rules before we start, for those of you who may not be so familiar with Zoom, although we are all getting used to all of these apps. So if you hover over the bottom of the screen with your cursor, you'll see all the webinar functions that you have access to. So we have chat, we have raise your hand and Q&A. We're going to use the chat function today. The chat will be enabled when we ask you to respond to certain questions. And I'll tell you when we turn the chat on. We'll also be using the poll function when we ask you to vote for something, and we'll be using the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please ask them in the Q&A section rather than in the chat. This will ensure that we can respond to them properly. And if you have any Pro Manchester specific questions, can you say this when you're using the Q&A section? So me and Sean will monitor the Q&A simultaneously so that we can support you in an efficient way. And I'm happy to answer any questions relevant to the webinar, and we've dedicated 10 minutes at the end to respond to any questions. So please bear with us if you don't get a reply straight away. And we'll also be recording the webinar and we'll send this to you later on. So I'd also suggest having something handy to take notes with, whatever you use, because we're going to make this interactive. Those of you who've been to our workshops before will know that we like to interact and ask you for your thoughts. So we're going to ask you to reflect on certain issues as we go along, and we'll be sending you a handout after the event if you request it. So a little bit about us and what we do. So as Sean says, we're a Manchester-based team of business psychologists. That's us in the picture. I'm the one in the turquoise dress. You can see it's my favorite color, different dress, same color. And we apply the principles of psychology to the world of work with businesses, public sector, and not-for-profit organizations. And we help both individuals and organizations to reach their full potential. And we focus on performance, leadership, talent, and change initiatives. And we do this by using scientific and evidence-based approaches, delivering world-class psychology for business. And you can find out more about us from our website, and the link is going to be shared in the chat now. So if you're interested in that, you can save that for later. So a bit more about me. So as I said, I'm Shelley Rubenstein. I'm a chartered psychologist of the occupational variety, and I've spent over 30 years applying the principles of psychology to the workplace. So lots of experience in executive coaching, leadership development, organizational change, and individual and team performance, also resilience, mediation, diversity, and inclusion work. Ultimately, any way in which I can help deliver people-centered value to a business is something that really excites me. So don't hesitate to ask me anything at all at the end of this webinar. And even afterwards, if you fancy a quick call or an email, I'd be delighted to speak with you. Now, does anyone remember the ABBA song, Knowing Me, Knowing You? Aha, don't worry, I'm not going to sing anymore. I've told you a little bit about me. So how about knowing you? I'm going to switch on the chat now. So if you want to share your name, the job that you do, where you're from, anything about you, so that other people can chat. So at this stage, in a real workshop, I'd be getting you to chat to the person next to you and get to know people, which is good for networking. So if you want to do some of that, that will be really good for you to get to know each other. So is anyone adding something to the chat? Okay, so that's your name and role. And then thinking a little bit more to get to know each other. Often humour can be shared. So I was wondering what kind of thing is making you laugh at the moment. So one of the things that's really amusing me is all of these videos, animal videos that people are sharing. I don't know if you've seen any of them. I particularly have been enjoying the ones where people are exercising with a dog on the back or that kind of thing. It's been quite entertaining for me. So anything that you find amusing? Yeah. So hi everyone. Hi Connie, Zoe, Michelle. I think we might have met. So it's good to see some familiar places. Kirsty at the Stock Exchange Hotel. I've been looking forward to going there, perhaps afterwards. So anything that anyone finds amusing, please share with other people. Okay, so pleased to meet you all virtually. So let's get on with managing our emotions at work. So what are we going to be looking at today? Well, we're going to be exploring 4 elements of emotional intelligence, focusing on emotion management in particular. We're going to discuss how fulfilling the emotional requirements of your job impacts on your self-control in different situations. We're also going to discover that not all negative feelings are necessarily bad and what this may mean for you at work. And finally, identify ways to regulate your emotions in an effective and meaningful way so that you and others feel positive. So what's an emotionally intelligent person like? What does it look like when you're being emotionally intelligent? Well, you're resilient, adaptive, creative in response to setbacks and obstacles, and we're having a few of those at the moment. You manage yourself with confidence and are motivated to work towards goals such as career development. You also take pride in your accomplishments, but not in a boastful or arrogant way. You're effective interpersonally, cooperative and team-focused. An emotionally intelligent person is skilled at negotiating disagreements, a great listener, and good oral communication skills. Also effective and participate in the organisation, keen to make a contribution, often showing leadership potential. So an emotionally intelligent person is emotionally competent. So that's a learned capability, emotional competence, using all 4 elements of emotional intelligence that results in outstanding performance at work. And I'm going to explain these elements to you now. So I don't know if any of you have heard of Daniel Goleman. So I just referred to the 4 elements of emotional intelligence, but in psychological terms, these are referred to as domains. Yeah, and these were developed by the science journalist Daniel Goleman. He was the one to put the psychological theory of emotional intelligence on the map for the general public. Probably you've seen the books in airports and stations. And he's written 3 bestsellers on the topic to date and emphasized the importance of emotional intelligence to having a positive life. So we've all heard of intelligence, IQ. So he's talked about emotional intelligence. And what we know is that the combination of a good IQ and good emotional intelligence gives you the full package. So the research into emotional intelligence had been going on for some time before Goleman popularized it. And it continues to be developed further and published in academic journals. So Goleman defined 4 main domains involved in the functioning of emotional and social intelligence. They look at who I am and what I do, and how I manage myself and how I manage my relationships with others. So the first area looks at who I am and how I manage myself, and that's called self-awareness. And it consists of our own emotional self-awareness, an accurate self-assessment of what's going on in situations and in myself, and also self-confidence is an element of this domain. So the second, social awareness, looks at who I am and how I handle relationships on the right-hand side. And this consists of empathy. So just to remind you what empathy is, it's being able to tune into a wide range of emotional signals to allow yourself to see someone else's perspective or their view of the world. It also includes organizational awareness. So this is the outside world, and service competence, how you serve your clients. The third area on the bottom right is called social skills, which is what I do in the way that I handle relationships. And this is made up of inspiration, influence, developing others, acting as a change catalyst, managing conflict, and collaborating with others. So we're going to be looking at self-control. This is the focus of today's session. So we've briefly skated over the other domains, and this is the one we're going to focus on. So we're going to look at how we manage our emotions to achieve self-control. So how I manage myself and the way that I take action. I'll describe this in more detail. So this is made up of self-control, which involves keeping our disruptive emotions and our impulses under control and channeling them into more useful ways. So the components of this are firstly transparency. So that's displaying honesty, integrity, and trustworthiness in the way that we work with other people. Then adaptability, so showing flexibility in adapting to changing situations or overcoming obstacles that we encounter. Also includes achievement. So this is the drive to improve performance, to meet our own inner standards of excellence. And initiative, seizing opportunities or creating them rather than waiting for someone else to tell you what to do every time. And finally, a big part of this is optimism, seeing change as an opportunity rather than a threat. And this can be a default position instead of pessimism, so a glass half full approach. So we're often in situations where we have to control our emotions, but what if the opposite applies, where we're required to demonstrate an emotion when we're not feeling it? Let me introduce you to the idea of emotional labor. So what is this concept of emotional labor? Well, emotional labor is the process of managing our own feelings and expressions to fulfill the emotional requirements of our jobs. So it's commonly seen in service-related jobs, and there's a few of you here, I notice, who are involved in those kinds of jobs where you're having direct connections with the public. But it happens in any job role that involves human interaction. So I'll give you an example from my own experience. So when I've been coaching people and I've empathized with their experiences, I have to use a lot of emotional labor to control my feelings if the situation reminds me of something that I've experienced personally, such as bereavement. So it takes more effort, more emotional labor for me to manage these emotions, because of course it's not appropriate for me to start crying and remembering my own bereavements when I'm trying to help someone else. I might tap into those emotions with empathy, but I'm not going to be showing them. So I have to control myself more. Emotional labor occurs in interactions with customers, with co-workers, and our managers. So the whole process of emotional labor includes the analysis and decision-making needed for the expression of our emotions, the appropriate expression of our emotions. And this is going on all the time internally without us being really conscious of it. So what's the opposite of that? The opposite is the suppression of the emotions that we feel. But it may be that these are not being able to be expressed, such as the example. So I'm suppressing, whilst being aware, that emotion that wouldn't be appropriate to share. So this means that people are required to display certain emotions in some situations which may not fit with how they're actually feeling. And I guess that's probably going on a lot at the moment for people. So these emotions are usually based on what we psychologists call display rules, which can significantly increase the strain on us and our employees. So what are display rules? They're the rules that are set by our profession or our organization. So for example, customer service advisors are commonly required to smile. Smile. Now, smiling is not simply a suggestion from the boss, a nice to have while you're working. It's a requirement for those kinds of jobs, regardless of how you may feel on the day. And when you continually need to show only those emotions that are appropriate for your job, despite how you feel, it can lead to something called emotional dissonance, otherwise known as emotional conflict, between your real emotions and those that you display to others. So dissonance is when something doesn't quite fit and you feel a bit uncomfortable. It's a feeling that's experienced when someone is forced to fake an emotion. Can you think of when you've experienced emotional conflict? So hold that thought in your head. Imagine a time when you've experienced that. It may have been recently, may have been in the past. So we're going to use the chat feature now. I asked you to think about your experience of emotional labor. Well, research shows that people manage their emotions during about 2/3 of the communications that they have at work. So in 2/3 of the communications that you're having at work, you are consciously managing your emotions. And we're interested to hear about the techniques that you use to manage this. So using the chat section on the lower part of the screen, can you share with us some tips or ideas of how you cope with the emotional requirements of your role? What techniques do you use? If you want to think about it and start adding those now. Yeah, so I think there's a bit of a theme emerging here about taking a few minutes, taking time away. And also, I think a really good tip is chatting it through with someone else before you take it back. So getting some time, testing ideas out. I like the Jackie's suggestion, going for a run to shake off your frustrations. I think there's a lot of going for runs happening at the moment. And I'm unfortunately having to be socially isolating. My husband is on that at-risk register. So I've been running up and down the stairs. I like focusing on your breathing, reframing thoughts and looking for the positives. And I love the planning and visualizing, taking time to prepare some great tips there. Really helpful, thank you. You can keep adding them because we'll be able to share these later. Okay, so it's interesting to see some of those different techniques of how you cope with the emotional requirements of your different jobs. But we're going to look now in more depth at what research tells us about how people cope with some of these requirements. And there are two main ways that people use to cope with their emotions. So the first one is something called surface acting. So surface acting is when we intentionally portray emotions that we aren't currently feeling. So we can go about doing this by changing our visible behavior, like facial expression, gestures, and voice. And this can happen when we need to display positivity. So I don't know how many of you have been to Disney World, but think about those people working at Disney World who have to smile and remain cheerful all day in a hot costume whilst children are going up, hitting them with various things. So that must be difficult. And when we need to hide negative emotions, such as masking your immediate dislike of a colleague's ideas or something that your boss says. So the degree of surface acting required by your job varies. It's based on the type of work that you do. So for example, external client-facing roles, such as you were expressing in the chat, versus the amount of surface acting with our internal roles with close colleagues who, after a while, sometimes become like family, so we're a bit less guarded about showing our real emotions. So the second type is called deep acting, and that entails the regulation of our inner feelings to match the display of our emotion required by the organisation. So for example, a colleague on the front desk at a hotel may be so happy with their job and believe in the company so much that they truly believe that the way that they treat a guest affects that individual guest's day and makes the guest associate the happy feeling with the hotel so much that they'll want to stay again. So being able to affect them positively is core to that employee's value system. So that is, they think it's important to positively impact a person's day. And they genuinely feel happy when they do. It's on a deep level, not on the surface. So it takes much less emotional labor. So if we think of actors who use method acting, which I'm sure you've all heard of, they're still acting as is expected, but they actually feel the emotion that they're portraying. And that means there is less emotional labor. So we're going now to launch a poll. So we've not done a poll for today. So please vote on whether you think deep or surface acting might exhaust people more. What do you think? Vote now. Be interesting to see the results. So we've got so far 88% on surface acting and 12% on deep acting. So, as is so often the case with psychology, it depends. It depends on both the individual and the situational context. So I think you're right, relentless surface acting is extremely draining physically and emotionally because it requires constant application of effort. On the other hand, if everyone went around all day authentically expressing all of their frustrations and irritations, it's how I really feel, so I'm going to show you how I really feel, it could get ugly pretty quickly. And I think morale would probably suffer. So I've never shouted at work in all of my years. Sometimes people might see that I'm a little bit frustrated, but that's not very often. So the famous phrase, fake it till you make it, might be true up to a certain point. The solution really is to find ways to maintain positive relationships with others without having to constantly monitor and consciously update the emotions that we're expressing, which uses a lot of emotional labor. So some research points to the idea that the best approach to surface acting is to find a way to really feel the emotions yourself, which is actually no longer surface acting. Yes, you've guessed, it's actually deep acting. So if you can elicit authentic emotions within yourself and then portray those, you won't pay the same energy toll that you do with surface acting, constant surface acting. So keeping positive and cheerful as much of the time as possible makes us feel better about things, as long as that is an authentic feeling, putting a positive spin. At this point, I'd like to stress that we may often link negative emotions to bad outcomes. So we know that we may get decreased performance, or it may be career limiting if we start shouting at our boss on a daily basis. So that's why we hide our true feelings. So let me see what you think about negative emotions. Are they definitely bad, mostly bad, it depends, good, or not sure? So vote now. What do you think? Okay, let's share the results and see what we think. So, lots of it depends. Oh yes, a few psychologists in the audience who like the it depends. So 9% definitely bad, 13% mostly bad. Good. So let's see the value then of negative emotion. So what is the value of negative emotion? We've said it depends in the poll. What does the research tell us? So broadly, the research tells us that pleasant emotions predict positive work outcomes, such as going above and beyond your job, increased proactivity, and proficiency. On the other hand, unpleasant emotions usually predict negative work outcomes, such as withdrawal of effort, sometimes minor theft, and social disengagement or social distancing from others at work, but not in a good way like we're having at the moment. Social distancing is positive. This is when people are in the workplace and they avoid people. But research also found that some negative emotions can be useful for certain types of performance. So paying attention or speedy decision making in the moment. So if there was a fire, We might be fearful that we're going to get burnt, but we will make a quick decision, even though we're experiencing that negative emotion, we'll make a quick decision to vacate the building because something else takes over. And also there are other examples. So anger might motivate some people to address injustice through campaigning for a cause. So in the olden days, the suffragettes, or more recently, climate campaigners. They're angry that we're ruining the world, so we're going to campaign. And also envy motivates some people towards self-improvement and boosts their performance. For example, car envy hasn't affected me. So to sum up then, happy workers are typically more productive, but both positive and negative states can be helpful for work outcomes, depending on the context in which they're experienced and expressed. So you were right to say it depends. So why is managing our emotions so important for us? Well, it might help your performance. We know that emotions have adaptive functions, so it makes sense to manage them in order to harness the benefits. For example, managing my frustrations with colleagues in order to complete a group project. It might also be viewed as part of the job. We were saying earlier about emotional labour. So in customer service roles, there are often explicit display rules. For example, service with a smile. Or think about the agreed ways of behaving in many relationships. For example, not shouting at your boss, as we said. We might also just want to feel good. So research tells us that people want to make themselves feel better in 90% of occasions. And you might want to help others. And there's a lot of really good stuff going on at the moment, what we call pro-social behaviour. And that means managing our emotions to support others. So keeping my fearful emotions to myself so that I don't negatively impact the team's morale. So which I'm doing every day. We have a well-being check-in in the morning, even for staff who are furloughed. It's important for us to know that they're okay at home. And that's really a challenge for managers and leaders at the moment, keeping their own emotions and fears in check to support other people. So that's pro-social behaviour. So throughout our lives, we're going to be in different situations, some of which will be in our control and some of which will be out of our control. So I'm going to talk to you about the control, influence and anticipate model and explain how your emotions are important in each level. So what can you control? Well, you can control spending time worrying about uncontrollable events, because this can often make you feel lost, helpless, and powerless to act. So the key to being more resilient is identifying those situations and events that you can control, rather than focusing on those that you can't control and worrying about them. So you can control how you view and respond to a challenge. So we were saying earlier, if you become a more glass half full person, more optimistic, you can view things and look at what you can control. What about what you can influence? Well, no one has total control over their life, but we can feel more in control by focusing on what you can influence. And this relates particularly to dealing with people and working with others. You can't control other people's behaviour. People have tried, but you can influence the way that they feel and act. So for example, acting with integrity and responding positively to others is more likely to lead to desirable outcomes for both you and the people involved. And what can you anticipate? There will be situations where you can neither control them or influence them. In these circumstances, as someone said in the poll earlier, you should, in the chat, you can anticipate an event that may happen and how people react and respond to it, and you can plan ahead. It can give you the opportunity to think things through in advance and plan how you're going to respond to any adversities and then overcome them by not being faced with them in the moment. So preparation for these events helps you to adapt to new situations and also to reduce your stress. So this is another one of those interactions. I've talked through the control, anticipate and influence model, and now it's time for reflection. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about a challenge that you're currently facing, that you may be feeling particularly emotional about. It could be a positive emotion, excited, or a negative but maybe realistic emotion, scared of what's going on at the moment. So jot down any ideas that you may have using the model. So this is for you to jot down on your own, on your bit of paper or your tablet or phone, wherever you want to record that. In your challenge, what can you control? What can you influence? What can you anticipate? Give you a minute or two to do that. And if, when you've done that, you decide that you want to share an example, please feel free to do so in the chat. We'll open the chat in case you want to share something. Just give you a couple of minutes. Thinking about recently that I'm excited about is how we can use platforms like Zoom more for coaching internationally. So I won't have to have all these flights, and holding workshops and webinars in a virtual way, which may reduce traveling time and save the environment. And that means that when we are out of this lockdown, I'll be able to do my face-to-face perhaps more sparingly. So that might be something that is a positive. You may have some things that may be more challenging at the moment. So if any of you want to share anything, that will be fine. If people feel it's too personal, that's also okay. But I hope that you will take this exercise away and that you will think more about what can you anticipate and what can you influence. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to the next section and how we link it all back to emotional intelligence. So self-control is the way that we control and manage ourselves. So you may remember that self-control is all about thinking prior to acting. It also involves having control over our mood swings and our impulses, which can often be harder to do in real life than it is in theory. So not allowing our mood swings and our impulses to disrupt our quality of life. And this is a challenge at the moment for many people working from home, where there may be either they're on their own and they're feeling lonely and disconnected, or they're in a house with lots of people, several people working from home, or with young children who are being homeschooled while you're trying to work. So self-control really comes to the fore at the moment, and it's a method of managing our emotions. How well are we all doing? It depends on the day. So how can we achieve emotion management? So before we move into some specific techniques and methods, I want to share some key considerations, and you may want to reflect on these, and that hopefully will help you to achieve emotion management. Now, time doesn't allow me to work through these in a lot of detail because we only have an hour for the webinar, but I'll add the questions on the chat so that you can copy them and reflect on them later on. So maybe you can think about the first thing, in which areas of your life you do have self-control, because it's always best to start with something positive. What's going well? We always do our reviews of workshops and events. What's gone well? What would have been even better is the second question. So where might you think you're doing well? In what areas of your life do you need more self-control? For example, spending too many hours working and leaving no time for anything else, especially now that we're more or less forced to work from home. Finding a balance between personal and work life can be quite challenging for people who are conscientious, who have high on conscientiousness like myself. It's a challenge for me to stop, to leave my study and go downstairs and eat something. So what emotions make you feel like you lack control? For example, anger or fear. So try identifying the emotions that mean that you lack control. So dissatisfaction, unhappiness, resentment, fear, anger. What about how much time you spend self-reflecting? How can you incorporate more of that? So we talked earlier about self-awareness being a part of emotional intelligence. So these considerations will help you to become more self-aware. You'll be in a better position to identify what enables or hinders managing your emotions. So what about some specific techniques that you can adopt for emotion management? Earlier, we talked about deep acting. So the tips that I'm going to share with you now are linked to deep acting. The first one is pay attention. So the first step to pulling off successful deep acting is just paying attention to what's going on in yourself. So try to acknowledge when you are surface acting and why you're doing that. What's brought up that feeling? From there, it really is about taking a step back and putting in an effort to actually feel the positive emotions you want to express with others. So remember earlier we talked about the person on the front desk in the hotel who really believes it, and the method actors. So this could involve reappraising your situation, which takes us to reappraisal. So reappraisal is interpreting a potentially emotion-evoking situation in a way that changes its emotional impact. So imagine you're going for a job interview. You might not just think about a test of your own worth to them, but also it's an opportunity for you to find out how much you like the organisation, how much you want to work with them. What do you think of the people who are interviewing you? So it's not just a test of your worth, it's a two-way thing. And that in itself can reduce your fear and anxiety. And what about focusing on the positive aspects of your work interactions and or why it's helpful to be positive with others in the workplace? When we have perspective taking, which suggests that you can alter the impact of your emotions by adopting a more objective perspective. For example, imagine yourself in any given challenging situation as an outside observer, almost like having an out-of-body experience. Try to remain detached from any emotions, and that enables you to see it in a different way. So using these three techniques means that you actively engage in more deep acting, which in the long term has many benefits. So we're coming towards the end of our time together, and I want to relate the take-home messages to you. So the first is that self-control is the way you control and manage yourself and your emotions, your inner resources and your abilities. And it might be hindered by several things. So today we touched on the emotional requirements of your job, that is emotional labour. We distinguished between the different ways that people deal with this, so surface acting versus deep acting, and suggesting that deep acting, because we believe in it, in reality, it's more effective in the long term. We've asked you to think about what you can control, what you can anticipate, and what you can influence. And finally, we identified what you can do in terms of deep acting. So reflecting, you might want to reflect on the questions that we've shared with you in the chat for you to do later. Paying attention, trying to acknowledge when you're surface acting so that you can move to some more positivity. Reappraising the situation, what's in it for you? How can you change the way that you feel? And taking an outsider perspective, being an observer outside looking in. So we hope that you found this helpful. And before we move to the Q&A part of the session, we want to ask you to vote, because it's really helpful for us, as I said, to see whether we're hitting the mark. So can I ask you to rate how useful you found the webinar so far? Thank you. So moving on to using the chat. Something else that will be helpful to us and to Sean is to tell us what you'd like to see more of in terms of webinar content related to leadership, talent, performance, and change. So if you want to put some ideas in the chat, that will be really helpful to see some of those ideas. What would you like to see more of? And if you can't think of any now and you want to send them later, that would also be very helpful to us. So I'll give you a minute to think of those ideas. What would you like to see more of? So scenarios, resources for additional reading. So someone's reading a book about imposter syndrome. Yes, we've done quite a lot of work on imposter syndrome, so that will be helpful. And we could certainly look at certain scenarios, and if people would say which particular types of scenarios they would find helpful. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thanks for those ideas. So we're going to now move on to the questions. And at this point, if anyone has to go, please bear in mind that we'll be happy to support you in any way that you can. Please don't hesitate to contact us. So you can use the hello@impact.co.uk email, or find information about areas that we work on the website. And we're going to be launching some more free webinars. So if you'd like to keep up to date with our news and views and webinars and all sorts of hints and tips that we offer every month, you may want to subscribe to our bulletin. So I'm going to add the link to the chat. If you want to take that down and sign up for our bulletin, we'd be delighted to send that to you monthly. Okay, so let's move now to the Q&A. So if people have a look at the questions, put some questions, I'll have a look at them and I will be able to answer those verbally, but we will take all the questions And whilst we may not be able to answer them all now, we will certainly get back to you later. So, any questions? May take you a minute or two to think of the questions. So Jackie Whittingham, you were thinking of something else that you were going to put in the chat. You can still do that. And Yvonne saying no questions from you, but thanking us. That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. Any questions that anyone would like to have answered at this point? About managing emotions, or any questions that you have for Sean about Pro Manchester, you can post those here as well. I'll give you another couple of minutes to put any questions in. Can everyone see the Q&A? I'm really pleased that people have said that they're going to be using the control, anticipate, and influence model. Yes, on the chat, Jackie was saying about how different we are, not just between gender, but also different personalities. That could be an interesting one. So we're going to give all of these suggestions that you've put in the chat some thought. It seems like there aren't any questions, so if people want to continue to add points to the chat rather than to ask any questions, that's also fine. I'll give you a little bit longer in case anyone does have any more questions or any other chat that they want to add. Oh, thank you, Andrew, for saying that you're going to apply this in real life. So some really nice questions, some ideas that people are sharing, even if for the moment there aren't any questions. But we've got 2 more minutes left of our session. If anyone wants to share any more chat, we'll be closing the session at 1. But if you want to send any questions to us later, we will be delighted to receive those, because another aspect of personality is that some people don't always think of things in the moment, and they go away and they think them through, they reflect, and then they want to get in touch. So I'd like to say thank you very much, and it has been really good to share this with you. I'm glad that we've had such a positive response, and we look forward to seeing you at webinars in the future. So thank you all for listening and participating, and I'm really looking forward to the day when we can all meet together at a Pro Manchester event and enjoy the nice pastries and fruit, of course, and the coffee. So thank you to Sean for hosting us, and thank you to all of you for participating. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.